Yeah, so today I'm just going to briefly talk about some of the general motivations that have driven our research group to look at, why do we do this participatory type of process, and specifically this calm, and we are going to drive this pun into the ground, I'm sure, this collaborative adaptive landscape management. And I'm going to dive right into kind of the details of a specific project that we've been working on for the past 3 years, and this is what we are calling the Collaborative Adaptive Management Project. I'm going to talk a little bit about the participatory research setting, some of the formal decision-making analyses that that have come out of this participatory process, and then get into kind of what this looks like on the ground in terms of an adaptive grazing management experiment, or rather the first approximation of that. And then I'll just wrap up with kind of some things that we've learned, we continue to learn, and where we're going next on all of this. So as many of you know, the rangeland profession is in a transformational stage right now. This symposium in itself speaks of that. There's been a lot of different qualitative, quantitative assessments that are really pointing to the need for all of us to adapt our science to meet management needs and to really address those challenging issues on rangelands, which are multiple use working landscapes, and to come up with solutions and approaches that are at scales relevant to these multiple use working landscapes. And so many of you are probably familiar with the Rangeland SEEP project, which was back in 2011. And some of the really poignant key recommendations that came out of this effort were to expand collaborations between scientists and managers, to really truly integrate those socioeconomic and ecological factors in examining outcomes, and of course evaluating the roles of adaptive management in meeting goals. And this is particularly relevant in meeting, balancing and merging multiple conservation and agricultural production goals on these working landscapes. So really this just really boils down to really merging research and management. And so this is some of the reasoning why we are moving towards more of a participatory process, because we really do want to have impact on the ground. To give you a little bit of an overview of some of the things that we've been doing, and this is just particularly in reference to some stuff we're doing here in California, and really trying to connect scientists, land managers, and policymakers. We're, of course, this collaborative adaptive management project. This is what I'm going to focus on today, but it's really an integral part of a multi-pronged approach that we've been taking, which includes a rancher decision-making survey. This was a mail survey in which we collaborated with the ranching community here in California to survey over 500 ranchers to get a better understanding of the ranch-level goals, management strategies, and information needs that people have in their operations. Following up on that, we're also doing on-ranch interviews and field surveys to understand kind of the broader contextual challenges at the landscape level across California. What are really the opportunities, what are the challenges on our working ranches. So as part of that larger approach, the Collaborative Adaptive Management Project, we started in 2012. We brought a diversity of rangeland stakeholders here in California. We invited them to our local university research station, which is about 70 miles north of here. And our stakeholders included ranchers, rangeland professionals, and conservation professionals. And basically, we brought them to the research station, and we asked them to work with us to develop, design, and implement a set of land management strategies to meet stakeholder identified goals. Basically, prescribe management strategies for this research station, or as scientists generally think, these treatments. And with the idea that we would implement, monitor, and adapt these management strategies with continued stakeholder input. And that's what we have been doing in the last couple of years. So, and we did this through a series of field workshops, and what we did is we had a total of 58 participants come, and we divided them into what we called working groups. And so these working groups were ranchers, rangeland professionals, conservation professionals, and these were homogeneous groups. And then we also had a couple of mixed groups, and so kind of a heterogeneous mixture of each of these different types of rangeland stakeholders. And the reason we divided them into these different groups was so that, one, we could better understand and characterize the decision-making priorities of each of these different stakeholders, because they each have their own goal priorities and experiences, but then also to really truly test the value of collaborative decision-making and diverse perspectives in these collaborative governance structures. So exactly how we did this, at the research center, we had 8 pastures, which cover about 1,200 acres, and we brought the participants up to the center, and our challenge to them was to answer these 3 general questions. First, what are the primary natural resource and agricultural goals that they would set for this landscape? What were the potential challenges, or maybe some of the potential opportunities they saw for this landscape? And then finally, what are the adaptive management strategies that they would recommend that we test to meet these goals? And to give you an idea of kind of the timeline of how these field workshops went, we started off, we did large group visits to the pastures. We went out, gave the participants time to look around. We gave them, of course, background information on the land management history, some of the natural resource management history for the research station. And then once they had time to do that, take some notes, we brought them back to the research headquarters and had them fill out computer surveys that generally targeted those 3 main questions that we were interested in. After that, we divided them into those working groups. So we had ranchers, conservation professionals, and rangeland professionals, and of course that mixed group. And we had them each divide up into rooms and discuss some of the goals and the landscape management strategies that they had set for the different pastures that they visited. And this gave them time to really hear what other people's answers were, kind of gave time for the learning process. After that, we gave everybody a chance to update or change the answers that they had given on the previous surveys. And then finally, we all came together in large group reporting so that everybody could hear at the end of the day which each of the groups had come up with and what the recommendations were. And then this was also a time where we all, the scientists and the managers, could come to some sort of consensus on where we were going with this project. So this was kind of the general timeline of the workshops in a nutshell, of course. What came out of this qualitatively, particularly in the group census meetings, was a sort of an overarching vision of ecological and economic sustainability, and with interrelated goals and specific objectives for vegetation, livestock, wildlife habitat, and soil health and water quality. And one of the very commonly agreed upon challenges for this landscape was to reduce invasive weeds. Particularly at this research station, we have a large infestation of medusa head, which many of you are probably familiar with across the West. And so this was a major challenge that was identified by pretty much all of the stakeholders. So in terms of individual differences between these different groups, when we looked at the individual computer surveys, this is a correspondence analysis, basically just an ordination looking at how each of these groups, we've got the ranchers, the rangeland professionals, the conservation professionals, and the mixed group, basically how they shook out in terms of the most popular goals. And these right here are the most popular goals across all of the respondents. And we saw that, not surprisingly, ranchers, rangeland professionals emphasize things like livestock production and forage production, whereas the conservation professionals and the mixed group emphasize things like wildlife habitat, weed management, plant diversity. This was how people answered the questions before their small group discussions. When we look at what that looks like after they had time to talk and discuss and make any changes to their surveys, we found, and just watch the triangles here, we found there actually wasn't much movement. And this isn't surprising because goals are pretty fundamental and probably not going to change your top priority goals in the matter of a couple hours of discussion. In terms of management practices, again, same type of plot. We've got a correspondence analysis here where we look at the most popular land management practices that people recommended. And again, we've got the ranchers over here looking at things like cross-fencing, drinking water, and the conservation professionals, again, looking at things like planting natives. One of the clear recommendations that came out of a lot of these discussions was that grazing management was the tool to use in this landscape. Remember that the overarching vision was economic and ecological sustainability. So grazing was a tool that everybody commonly identified. And so if you look at some of these most popular practices, the recommendations like grazing intensity, grazing timing, grazing management, residual dry matter methods, and cross-fencing. When we look, this was before discussion, when we look at after discussion how these different groups shook out, again, not surprisingly, there wasn't a whole lot of movement, particularly in these homogeneous groups. There's a little bit of movement here in the mixed group. But again, you know, the practices that people know of, are familiar with, don't really change before and after discussion. What we did see that did change before and after discussion was how these different groups linked their goals to the management practices. And we can see that in, we call these goal method link networks. And what we see is for all of the groups, we saw before and after discussion that they added more ties, they put more links between their goals and methods. And the biggest changes we saw were in the mixed group. And this is the model of the mixed group here before and after discussion. And what you can see here is that we have stronger and more ties between goals and practices after discussion. And so this really speaks to the value of having these diverse perspectives in these collaborative governance structures. As we learned this morning, we need diverse perspectives to find solutions to the most challenging problems. Now, in terms of how did we translate this, these two-day workshops, how do we translate that to an on-the-ground experiment? Well, what we did, and this is just an aerial shot here of the research station in Yuba County, California, just north of here. And we took the information from the individual computer surveys, the group discussions, and then we have an ongoing advisory team which is composed of individuals that volunteered from our participant workshops that we meet with on a regular basis. And so we took all of this information and synthesized a set of adaptive grazing management treatments to test across this landscape for those multiple goals that these stakeholders identified. And so these are the treatments that our research and management team came up with. And the treatments now that we've been testing, we've just entered our third season of grazing treatments. And to give you a little bit of idea of how these kind of shake out in terms of grazing practices on ranches across California. I mentioned earlier that we did a mail survey with about 500 ranchers across California. And when we looked at the general strategies that people use on their ranches through latent class analysis, we found generally there's three types of things that people tend to do on their own private lands. And the first is an extensive rotation. Almost about half of the respondents to our survey kind of do this, you know, on the level of weeks, and with some growing season rest. The second most popular was season-long continuous grazing, and then the third was just year-long set stock. Now, the treatments that our stakeholder groups came up with, the fall, spring, and the winter grazing treatments, and then that season-long grazing treatment, basically represent about 80% of what people are doing out on ranches. What we're adding here, though, is this this more intensive targeted grazing type treatment. And this was in direct response to what people wanted to test on the research station. And as one of our advisors so poignantly put, we want to see if this is a train wreck or a success on your place before we try it on ours. So that's what they wanted. They wanted to test it. They want to see what this looks like on this UC demonstration ranch. In terms of monitoring, because that is a very key part in all of this, just give you a quick overview of what we're doing. And these are the different goals that were identified by those stakeholders. And we've selected a set of sort of rapid assessment metrics to monitor these goals throughout these grazing treatment processes. And the way we're doing this is, there we go. This is just a map here of two of the grassland treatment pastures. This is the fall spring grazing, and this is that fall spring targeted. And we have a set of permanently installed sites. We've got about 4 sites four sample sites per acre across these treatments, where we are systematically and regularly monitoring each of these metrics for each of these goals across this landscape. And where we are in that process is right now we are in the middle of our 2015 grazing season, so this is the 3rd year. We've just finished our fall/winter grazing treatment, and we're actually, for those of you that are coming to the Sierra Foothill Research and Extension Center field trip on Wednesday, we'll talk a lot more about what this looks like on the ground and what we're seeing. And so some of the lessons that we've learned, at least so far, is that, as you all know, not surprisingly, it's critical to get multiple stakeholder involvement from the start to really get buy-in on these. It ensures the relevance of this work. One of the things that has been very, very important for us is hearing from the stakeholders that they see these treatments as real things that they can scale to their ranches, and they can really value what the outcomes are, what that translates to their own ranches. Also, as I mentioned earlier, integrating diverse perspectives. Also very key. If we want to manage these landscapes as multiple-use landscapes, then we have to integrate these different experiences. Of course, as we just heard a little bit earlier in the first talk, long-term commitments from both the science and advisory teams. This is a 10-year, 1,200-acre, 400-plus steer research project, and we are very committed to keeping this funded and keeping this going. And the stakeholders, the participants, our advisory team, are all very continuously engaged and excited about this project. And I think that's really what has made this a success so far. And then, of course, communication is key. As I said, we have these regular advisory field days where we're reporting back to them the sort of our different results that we're seeing in the monitoring data, allowing for feedback. It's very important. And then they can see for themselves, too, what these treatments look like on the ground. And then, of course, also consulting with our team so that we're all on the same page as to things like, management triggers. How are we going to continue to adaptively manage these treatments and really test these and understand the processes that are occurring? And as one of our advisors said, we need to give things time to work. We want to make sure that we understand what's going on in these treatments, and not do anything too quick, too big, too fast, but really give things time to work. So I just wanted to recognize all of the different people that have helped make this a success. Of course, the UC Sierra Foothill Research and Extension Center and the staff there. As I said, resources is a huge, important part of this whole project. And our advisory team, and particularly all of the participants from the workshop. Like I said, we had over 58 individuals that participated in this and representing about 25 different organizations. And so that's all I have to cover for now. I can take any questions now, and of course I'll be around the rest of the week, and hopefully some of you can come up to the field station this week on the trip, and we can talk more about kind of the on-the-ground experiment and what we're seeing.